Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a deeply urgent, rapidly evolving crisis that's unfolding right this second. We're tracking a brand new outbreak of the Ebola virus, and it's currently gripping the Democratic Republic of the Congo along with neighboring Uganda. So, our goal today is to take the really complex facts on the ground and break them down. We're going to look at exactly what's happening, why this specific outbreak is just so incredibly concerning, and what's actually being done to stop it. To really set the stakes here, I want you to hear this stark quote from Dr. Margaret Harris over at the UN Institute for Training and Research. She points out that, look, Ebola is always a serious threat. But this current outbreak, it's happening under what she calls a perfect storm of conditions. And today, we're going to unpack exactly what makes up that perfect storm, from the literal biology of the virus itself all the way to the incredibly messy geopolitics of the region it's emerged in. Okay, so let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with a global health emergency, move into profiling the virus, then a geopolitical perfect storm, the community defense, and finally, stopping the regional spread.
All right, Section 1, a global health emergency and the rapid response.
So the World Health Organization absolutely did not hesitate here. They immediately declared a public health emergency of international concern. And that is not a label they just throw around lightly. It is literally the highest level of alarm the WHO can sound. In fact, they've only used it 10 times in history. What's really crucial to understand here is that this was the fastest emergency declaration ever made for an Ebola outbreak. The WHO Director General basically pulled out all the stops to get this thing under control, immediately releasing $500,000 from their emergency contingency fund just to push out rapid medical supplies and protective gear. Now, the reason for that lightning-fast response? It's pretty alarming. The outbreak isn't fully contained to its rural epicenter. We've actually already seen imported cases travel vast distances to highly populated urban centers. I'm talking about confirmed and suspected cases popping up in Kampala, which has 1.8 million residents, Goma, a regional capital of 1 million people, and honestly, most shockingly, Kinshasa, which is a massive, massive city of 18.5 million people, located 1,600 kilometers away. To put that into perspective, that travel distance is roughly like going from London to Athens. And while there isn't documented local spread in these cities quite yet, the mere fact that the virus traveled that far undetected, yeah, that's a massive wake-up call. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Profiling the virus, biology, and history. So, Ebola originally hangs out in fruit bats across Central Africa, and it jumps to humans through close contact. And historically, the DRC has really borne the brunt of this disease. Actually, this is the country's 17th outbreak. The whole story of this virus essentially started there back in 1976 in the village of Yambuku. Fun fact, it was named after the local Ebola River specifically to avoid putting a stigma on the village itself. Since those early days, we've obviously seen the devastating 2014 outbreak in West Africa that claimed over 11,300 lives, and then a really severe one in the DRC starting in 2018 that killed nearly 2,300 people. But the core of the medical panic right now, it all comes down to the specific strain of the virus. See, most outbreaks in the DRC have been the Zaire strain. And for the Zaire strain, the medical community actually has established vaccine candidates and specific treatments. But this current outbreak is the Bundibugyo strain. It's a highly unusual strain. It's only ever caused 2 previous outbreaks. So right now, as we speak, there are absolutely 0 available vaccines and no specific medicines for it. This basically means authorities can't use their go-to ring vaccination strategy, where you vaccinate a protective ring of people around confirmed cases to block the spread. We just don't have that option here. Without vaccines or specific meds, the stakes just skyrocket. Officials note that this specific Bundibugyo strain can have a fatality rate of up to 50%. When you combine high transmissibility through bodily fluids with a 50% mortality rate and no vaccine, the margin for error in the public health response literally drops to 0. Which brings us to Section 3, a geopolitical perfect storm, conflict and collapse. So why is this outbreak so uniquely hard to contain? Well, it's all about these compounding, overlapping crisis factors. Even before Ebola arrived, groups like Medicine Sans Frontières were reporting that the local health system had already completely collapsed. They were dealing with severe, unmanaged outbreaks of cholera, mpox, and basically zero care infrastructure for victims of violence. On top of that, the epicenter hits these mining towns where temporary workers are constantly coming and going. It's sitting right on a major commercial corridor with massive daily traffic. And finally, the absolute hardest factor of all. It's happening right in the middle of an active conflict zone.
The Ituri province and the surrounding areas are right now caught in complex fighting between rival factions. There are active operations involving various armed groups, including M23, Codeco, ISIL affiliates, and the Congolese army. And look, from a strictly operational standpoint, having multiple armed factions actively fighting creates severe medical mobility constraints. Institutions like the Red Cross and the WHO, they have a strict duty of care to protect their personnel. Trying to navigate these security layers means aid workers simply cannot move freely from point A to point B to track the virus. It's basically a logistical nightmare.
And the human toll on those medical responders is just devastating. Listen to this firsthand account from Dr. Margaret Harris about her previous work in the area. She says, "I once arrived at a treatment center that had been trashed and destroyed with another colleague to see if we could continue doing it just us two. I mean, medical staff are quite literally caught in the crossfire. Sometimes international NGOs can't even enter because of strict security rules against traveling with armed escorts, so you're left with incredibly brave, very small teams facing extreme physical danger just to provide basic care. So the big question is, how do you fight a highly fatal virus with no vaccines in a conflict zone where the health system has basically collapsed?" Let's look at the solution in Section 4, the community defense, the front line. Here is the absolute crucial takeaway. When international intervention is bottlenecked by war and a lack of vaccines, the local community steps up and becomes the absolute backbone of the medical response. Experts always emphasize that if you contract Ebola in this region, your absolute best chance of survival is being treated by a local Congolese doctor. Why? Because they know this disease better than anyone else in the world. Instead of just relying on international teams flying in, the whole strategy has to pivot to empowering the local health workers who are already on the ground. Since there's no magic bullet vaccine right now, the only tool left to actually stop the spread is behavioral change. And that requires a very specific chronological approach. First, authorities absolutely must build deep local trust by engaging with communities. Second, trusted local communicators. We're talking village volunteers, long-term health workers. They have to actively stop the spread of harmful rumors. Because out there, a rumor can be deadlier than ignorance. It's only once that trust is built and the rumors are silenced that you can actually start implementing strict, evidence-based safety measures for families to protect themselves. Moving to our final part, Section 5, stopping the regional spread and the window of action. Right now, a huge source of anxiety for health officials comes from a finding by researchers at Imperial College London. They indicated that this virus was likely transmitting completely undetected since late April. Think about that. That's several weeks where the illness was just spreading silently. And it was during that exact lag period that the body of a victim was actually transported to a really populous mining town. It gave the virus a head start to travel undetected down commercial corridors and straight toward the capitals of neighboring nations. Because this virus has already proven it can move fast and travel far, regional action is required like yesterday. As global health experts say, you really can't build a ship while you're already in the water. So countries bordering the DRC, specifically Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan, must urgently implement active heightened surveillance. They need to train their health workers to have a really high index of suspicion for the early signs of the virus, which, tricky enough, often just presents as a basic fever. The goal is that any new localized outbreaks can be contained immediately, right at the source. Which brings us to the ultimate question as we wrap up today's explainer. Will regional surveillance and community-led defense actually be enough to stop the next wave? The global health community has pulled the highest alarm. Emergency funds are deployed, and local doctors are out there fighting on the front lines of a literal conflict zone without a vaccine. It is the definition of a perfect storm. And these coming weeks, they are going to be absolutely critical in determining if this localized emergency turns into a wider regional catastrophe. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive, and definitely keep your eyes on the data as this story continues to develop.